Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And I know what you're thinking, Rob, don't you ever get tired of talking about the same book every episode? And the answer, esteemed audience, is no. I never get tired of talking about Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It's my favorite book. It is Batman as an 11-year-old boy genius detective who fights giant robot bees. It's got a multiracial cast. It is action and adventure from start to finish in the spirit of a comic book. The chapters are short, the way I like, and there's lots of humor and multiple Batman references. See if you can spot them all. If you're curious to check that book out, Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees is available as a paperback and audiobook narrated by the exquisite David Radke, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. And once you've enjoyed it, check out the sequel, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. No spoilers, but this time he's fighting alligator people, so it's pretty exciting. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written novels for older readers, such as All Together Now, a zombie story, which is a young adult novel written in the style of The Walking Dead. It's essentially Walking Dead fan fiction, but it's real focused on characters and emotions and what teenagers would feel and think and do during the apocalypse, finding hope when there is no hope. There's also a companion novel, All Right Now, a short zombie story, which is more zombies, but I wrote it immediately after the birth of my child. So it's about a man who has a newborn baby that he has to guide through the zombie apocalypse, which was really useful. My wife really appreciated that because we just brought a new baby home from the hospital, and I'm off working on a story about zombies. And how I'm going to rationalize becoming a father. So she really appreciated me focused on that while there was a newborn baby that needed to be taken care of. And then, of course, I've written the Book of David, which is a 5-part serial horror novel in the style of Stephen King. It is extremely profane, extremely violent, extremely everything. It's an absurd series to promote from this show, but I only do one show, so we're going to do it. It's about an atheist who buys a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions involving flying saucers. Lots of talk of simulation theory. Lots of great stuff in the Book of David. If you're curious, the first of the 5 chapters, the Book of David, Chapter 1 by Robert Kent, is also available to download free as an audiobook. Once you're hooked, come see me with money for the other 4 chapters. You're going to have a good time. Coming up next Saturday, we're going to have another amazing guest. Again, I'm tired of saying who the guest is and then being wrong when we either reschedule or I have an episode off. But if you're curious, you can head to middlegradeninja.com. I've got an entire schedule listed there publicly of the episodes that are upcoming. You can also check out written interviews with hundreds of publishing professionals, authors, editors, literary agents, folks that you want to know about, including tonight's guest, Christa Heschke. Christa, how are you this evening?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time to do this. I can't wait to talk to you and kind of pick your brain for all the knowledge I know you have about publishing, because you've been doing this a little while now, yeah. If you would just give us an overview of your career.
Yeah, sure. So I started as an intern back in college, both agency interns. So I started at Writer's House. I interned there actually twice, and then I interned at Sterling Lord Literistic. And then back in 2009, I joined the children's department of McIntosh and Otis as an assistant, where I worked under Edward Necker-Salmer for a few years, and then was promoted to an agent in 2013, and I've been agenting since. So just a little over 6 years now.
So did you always know that you wanted to be a literary agent?
No, not specifically. When I was in college, I was an English major, like a lot of us are, and I didn't specifically want to teach. And one of my friends actually interned at Writer's House, and he's like, "You would love this. You are a big reader. You should, apply for an internship." And I did. And I hadn't really thought much about working in publishing at all, and I loved it. And I liked experiencing the agency side of things and, the potential of finding that next great author in the query, pile, and being the first set of eyes on these things. It just was really exciting to me. And then I ended up on the kids side of things, and I can't imagine being anywhere else, honestly. I love it so much. I'm very much a kid at heart, so yeah, it's a perfect fit.
So when you were originally majoring in English, was it just because you loved to read and so that was a good subject to major in, or did you have some other ambition with
That
your
was
degree?
definitely a big part of it. I always was a big reader. My dad was a big reader and got me into reading at a very young age. So even before I knew how to read, my parents said I was making up stories by looking at the picture books and just like trying to remember what my parents said and, doing stories that way. And then that just, my whole life, always been a big reader. But when I started college, it wasn't necessarily what I initially thought of doing. I actually started pre-med. So totally different. And then I realized that wasn't for me. I thought about nursing, and then I was like, I have to think more about what I'm passionate about and what I love. That was more like, hey, this is a, great position to go for. And then English, I wasn't sure what I would do with that. But, once I got into learning that being in publishing was a thing, it just, it kind of fell into place.
No, when we talked with Agent Holly Root, she also was in, I think, pre-med,
Mm-hmm.
and she said that eventually, when she's done running her own business and finds time, she's going to try and still be a part-time doctor eventually.
Oh, yeah.
Which, if anyone could do it,
I mean,
I'm
that would
sure
be
she
amazing.
could. So you get an internship with Writers House, and
Mm-hmm.
you were in school at Binghamton, is that right?
That's right. Yep.
So did you grow up in New York?
Yeah, I grew up in the state. So I grew up in Western New York, about an hour and a half south of Buffalo, very small town. So Binghamton was pretty much halfway in between where I grew up in the city. And a lot of people who go to Binghamton are from Long Island and the city. So I started visiting the city more. And then as soon as I knew I wanted to get into publishing, I think maybe 2 weeks after I graduated college, I moved to New York. Um, and started looking for jobs, and luckily I have an aunt who lives here, so when I first moved, I lived with her for a bit, and yeah, so I've lived in the city now since 2008, so a
That's
while.
where I'm talking to you tonight, is in New York City.
Yep, I'm in Brooklyn.
Excellent. So that's a very lucky break if you have an aunt that's living right there. And I don't know if she lets you stay rent free or just gave you a better deal than you might have got it elsewhere.
At first, like while I was looking for jobs, but as soon as I got a job, then there was definitely rent that was to be paid.
Gotcha. That's one of
But
my.
I know I was lucky and didn't, otherwise I probably would have been living with 6 roommates somewhere, but yeah, so I definitely was lucky.
That's what I love are those stories about me and my 6 roommates in a studio apartment.
It's probably a good story, right?
So Writers House, you were an intern there twice. So they just have clear defined internships, or?
So what happened is the first time I interned there was only for winter break. So that was just the month of January. So it was just kind of an intro, getting a sense of what working on the agency side was like. And then the second time I was there for a full semester. So I got the full experience. And Writers House was really great with their internship programs. And I know they still do this now, where they almost do kind of master classes where you can learn about subrights or audio, the book process, all different parts of the book process, where they'd have different agents teach that, and they would bring, intern alumni in to talk about what it's like since they interned and what their job is. So it was a really great learning experience for me, for sure.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, they have a great program over there.
And that convinced you that this is the life.
Yeah, it got me to start thinking about it for sure. And then when I had my second internship, which was at Sterling Lord, and then I was seeing what it was like to work at a slightly different agency, and seeing other sides of publishing there too, because I learned different things at each place, I would say. After that, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do.
And so, when did you decide that children's books were going to be your specialty, and why did you decide that?
Yeah, the funny thing is that in both of my internships, I was mostly reading adult. So I really wasn't reading any children's during that time. So it just happened when I graduated. I graduated in 2008, and I was applying to a little bit of everything, because just breaking into publishing can definitely be tricky. And it just ended up that I actually hadn't applied to the job at McIntosh and Otis. I'd interned at Curtis Brown, and my mentor, who I mentioned before, Edward Neckarsalmer, he started there. And so the person I interviewed with at Curtis Brown, they're like, hey, we know you're looking for an assistant. You should bring this girl in. So I got a call from Edward, and I was like, who is this? McIntosh and Otis? And I'd been interviewing for a while. And then I went in and I was hired the next day. And Edward did the children's department, so picture books up through YA. So I just kind of fell into the children's side of things. But once I was there for a while, I just knew this was the perfect fit because I love reading YA. I love reading middle grade. I loved getting to learn the picture book side of things. So it just ended up working out very well.
Do you see yourself eventually taking on some adult book clients as well, or can it be children's books, you think, from here on out?
It's definitely children's books is going to be the focus, but I have been circling around taking on the occasional adult project. When I was a teenager, I read pretty much solely adult kind of girl power fantasy. So that's what I'm thinking of. I'm open to it right now, so selectively taking on the occasional adult fantasy and maybe adult sci-fi, maybe adult horror, so more on the genre side of things. I think, but I think children's is always going to be my main focus, though. So that'll be every once in a while type of thing.
So what is it specifically about children's books that draws you in and keeps your focus?
I mean, there's so many things. I feel like both middle grade YA and picture books too, they have a lot to say. And I know there's often the conversation about, oh, well, young adult books, that's not real literature. Why don't you read adult? And that's definitely not true at all. YA books are saying just as many important things as adult books are. They're covering all kinds of important subject matter. I like that YA and middle grade are very open as far as different genres that are working and that I can work in. So all the way from, fantasy and horror to contemporary to darker, more issue-driven books, like books dealing with social justice issues. There's just such a wide range to work with. So I really just enjoy reading YA, not only for work, but also, for fun too. And then middle grade also, it's just one of those areas where there's just so many great books out there. I love a good middle grade, ghost story, something creepy, action adventure, everything. I think it's just fun to look back and remember what it was like to be a kid and just those fond feelings, and you get that when you're reading. So it's just fun. I don't know.
No, I 100% agree, and I imagine most anybody tuning into a show called Middle Grade Ninja is probably a half on our side, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's just, especially with being a fantasy reader too, like YA fantasy has just been blowing up over the last few years, and there's never a lack of things for me to read there. So many beautifully written, great stories. So yeah, it's just been really fun to see how the industry's been changing and all the different genres you can work on. And there's always something different, crossing my desk. So I like that part of it a lot.
Well, that brings us to the burning question that I know esteemed audience wants to know about. What types of projects are you currently seeking?
I would say that I'm looking for a little bit of everything, although my picture book list is very, very full. So I'm getting really selective on that side of things. My YA list I definitely am looking for more YA, and middle grade is a big hole in my list right now. I have a few middle grade authors I work with, and it's an area that I'm eagerly looking to acquire more. And as far as middle grade, I like a little bit of everything. I love a good, beautifully written, more literary, issue-driven novel. I like a humorous contemporary. I mentioned, creepy middle grade. So I'm really all over the board as far as what I'm looking for there. And then with YA, I would say right now what I'm looking for the most is I work on a lot of darker, grittier, kind of edgy stuff. So I'm looking to balance that a bit. And I'd really love to do a little bit more lighter YA. So like a good YA rom-com, something that makes me laugh. I don't get enough of that in my inbox. So it's something I'm definitely really actively looking for. And especially own voices, diverse perspectives or across the board, whether it's picture books, middle grade, or YA, I'm always looking for.
Gotcha. So lots of follow-up questions for that. Let's start with creepy middle grade.
Yeah.
'Cause that's a favorite hobby horse of mine. I love a creepy middle grade. What is there such a thing as too creepy in middle grade?
Yeah, I would say how I look at it is middle grade is generally you're thinking of a PG movie rating. So I would say where it would be too creepy is if you start getting more violent. I feel like usually if there's anything violent happening, it's more alluded to versus outright said or described in any way. But as long as you're not doing that, I think you can go pretty far. There's plenty of pretty creepy, middle grade out there. So
what are some of your favorite creepy middle grades?
I really like Doll Bones by Holly Black. That's a favorite. I read a lot of Goosebumps by R.L. Stine when I was a kid. So anything along those lines. So I like kind of more almost silly creepy, but also straight up creepy, eerie atmospheres, strange small towns. Yeah, I like it all. I'm a big horror movie person too. So yeah, anything that, keeps me up at night turning pages is something I'm drawn to.
Do you read for fun as well as for work?
I definitely do as much as I can. I wish I had a little bit more time to do that. But yeah, I always love to see, what's been recently published. I have a very long to read list. I'm always keeping track of, new things that are coming out that are grabbing my attention and adding them to the list. But yeah, as much as I can, I'm also reading for fun.
So how much reading do you typically do on a daily basis, weekly basis?
Yeah, so I am reading pretty much every night after work when I get home. So during work hours, we're a 10 to 6 office, which is just kind of loose. I'm often there later. But when I get home, like when I go to bed, that's what I'm doing pretty much every night, reading for at least a couple hours, whether it's a client manuscript or a potential new client manuscript, or going through queries. So it's a pretty much nightly ritual for me.
So you could be reading somebody's query letter in bed in your jammies with the covers up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Or on my couch, depending if I've made it to my room yet. But also I have my query email on my phone, so I'm probably looking at it a little too much. So sometimes on the train, on my way to work, even when I'm at work, sometimes I glance at my phone and my query email. So I'm always kind of glancing at least, even if I'm not fully reading yet. I'll see what's coming in and have an idea, and I'm like, ooh, that stood out to me. I'm gonna look at that one a little bit closer. But I do read all my queries with the help of my wonderful assistant Danielle. So they are definitely all read. So I read them as much as I can.
So if you're looking at your phone to see a query that's coming, is that one that Danielle's already looked at and referred on to you?
No.
Or are you both hitting the inbox at the same time?
No, it's just me seeing it as it comes in. So I'm looking at everything, and Danielle will send things over to me too, but I'm always in there and glancing, so I'm seeing pretty much anything that comes in.
And how many queries are you receiving on a daily basis, weekly basis?
It varies. So after I go to a conference or I do, a pitch contest or something like that, it could be, 20, 30 in one day. I would say it's at least 10 a day. Sometimes quite a bit more. It really varies.
Are there busy seasons for queries?
Not really. I don't feel like there's ever a time where I'm getting a significantly more than others. Fall might be a little bit more busy before the holidays and maybe right in the new year. Might be a little more volume, but in general, it's pretty consistent, the amount of queries I'm getting.
So a special pro tip for the people smart enough to listen, is there a particularly good time of year to send you a query?
No, not really. Honestly, I don't ever close to queries. I know some agents do. So I'll see them no matter when you send them. So there's not really a better time than others.
I was hoping you'd tell me April 4th
secret,
to April
yeah.
17th. That's the time. So when you're seeing those queries, you're checking them on your phone. Mm-hmm. How are you evaluating them, and how can anybody listening to this hope to stand out and get your attention?
Yeah, I start at the subject line. Like, that's one of the first things. I get a lot of queries that just say query in the subject line, and that's it, or to Christa Heschke. And I have a specific query email, which is very clear on our website. And then I have kind of my one from all my other professional things, at emails from editors and all that. So that email, I know it's a query if it's going there. So I like to see a specific subject line, and usually that would include, the title and whether it's YA or if it's a picture book or it's a middle grade. Because never underestimate the power of a good title. Sometimes just by seeing YA mystery and it has a really great title, I'm like, ooh, I got to see this. I'm really looking for mystery right now. So I'd say definitely be specific and don't ignore the subject line of an email. And then once I get into it, the hook is always important. That one or two liner where it really gives me a sense of what the project is going to be about and what makes it different. I think it's really helpful also when authors use really good comparative titles, so I can get more of a sense of what it is I'm going to be reading. A brief summary. If it's a genre I'm even looking for. So and also the details too, like word count, genre, age range, and a little bit about you too, like a little bio. So all those things I'm looking at, and that helps me determine whether I want to read on or not.
Gotcha. So let's break that down a little bit. What's a great subject line look like? Like The Haunted Shovel, a middle grade novel?
I like The Haunted Shovel. I like that. I'd be curious to be like, yes. So the title, the age range, and then the genre in the subject line, I think is good. More than that, then it just gets to be too long.
Yeah, then it's just the query.
Just give me the basics. Don't waste time like saying query or for Christa, or like I said, any of that stuff. Just straight to the point, what I'm going to be seeing when I open the query.
And then you open it up, and of course, it doesn't say anything dumb like "Dear Agent," because that's what are you doing? It says "Dear Christa
Dear
Heschke."
Editor. I get that too sometimes.
Dear book person.
Or to the wrong person and totally wrong name.
But if it's a good query, are you still kind of curious and just send them a quick correction? Hey, I'm actually Christa, but I like your idea.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna not read it. It's a little red flag if I see that maybe they didn't do their research, or they just sent a big mass email to like every agent and didn't really think about, who might be the best fit for my work. What do they actually work on? That means a lot to agents, that you kind of have an idea of who you're approaching and have a reason for it. But yeah, I mean, even if it has one of those mistakes, I still will read into the query and see if it's something that piques my interest.
So if it is a mass email, I mean, is that even worth your time?
No, because I feel like a lot of the mass emails where it's very clear, like I've gotten emails where you see all the CCs. So you see every agent that's on there. And I was like, oh man, no.
You're not impressed that that's an efficient writer?
What? Sorry?
So you're not impressed that that's an efficient writer?
No, because usually then the rest of the email is very, it's not specified to a specific person. They don't really know what I work on. So generally when you read the query, it kind of matches the fact that they didn't really address it to anyone specifically.
Well, I assume anybody smart enough to be watching or listening to this show already knows that that's a huge no-no, and they won't even think about it. Okay.
Hopefully.
Dear Christa Heschke.
I have some stuff on my blog too about that.
Oh, we should mention that.
Yeah.
What's the name of your blog?
So it's Never Ending Stories, which is clearly a Never Ending Story reference, which is definitely one of my favorite books and movies. I like both versions. So it's just christaheschke.blogspot.com. And when I first started agenting, and I add the occasional article now, but I had all these kind of how-to articles. So what do you do, for instance, if you get an offer from an agent? How do you handle that? So I was trying to address some things that I felt that authors might not have much access to online if they Google it. So there's certain areas like that are just seem to be a mystery. But it's like, well, what do I do if this happens? What do I do if this happens as an author? So I was trying to fill some of those gaps. And then I have, the standard stuff too, like query letters and query emails and all those good things as well. So I do have some advice there, and I try to do a new article every once in a while.
So, I mean, anybody that goes there and reads your article about specifically how to write a query can probably write the ideal query to get your attention, right?
Probably, yeah.
So, and I noticed you're interviewing authors there as well. I saw you just talked with our previous guest, Annie Sullivan.
Yeah.
And some other great folks.
Mm-hmm.
So what, because I know you have nothing but free time being a literary agent. And I also know blogging takes up quite a bit of time. So obviously you're doing good for the writer community. You're hopefully smoothing out your inbox with better written queries. I don't know, ROI seems to be the wrong thing to ask, but what are you getting? What benefit have you found that you're getting from your blog?
I definitely feel, especially when I first started out as an agent, it was helping me to be seen so that writers could find me and then query me. So it definitely was really helpful to get started. And also, you mentioned the author interviews that I do with my clients, and I do giveaways and things like that. So I also try to use it to, for author exposure as well. So it's been helpful for that too. And just connecting with authors. So I have my comments open. So usually when I post, like especially a new kind of advice article on something specific in publishing, I will look at, the comments, and I will try to respond to as many as I can. So I feel like it's been good with maybe making me seem, less scary and less on a pedestal to writers, and show people I'm approachable, and, I want to help authors too.
That makes sense. I mean, why would you be in the job that you're in if you didn't like authors?
Yeah, no, I love that part of it, and I love going to conferences. I actively go to SCBWI, and that's a great place to meet new authors and interact with them, and I love all those things, so it's a lot of fun.
And so many questions that I'm trying. They're all like getting clogged in my mind, trying to pick just the right one.
Your video froze again, by the way. Sorry.
Oh, you know what? We'll just keep talking, and hopefully it'll come back.
Okay.
And if not, hopefully it's not frozen in a terrible expression. Hopefully it's a reasonable thing. Okay, good. So long as I've got like one eye closed, we'll be all right.
Both eyes are open.
So okay, well, getting back to the query just a little bit, and then we'll move on. I assume, do you want a first paragraph talking about how the author came to find you, why they think that you're the agent for them?
Yeah, usually just like a line or two. Wouldn't spend more time than that, where it's just like, dear Christa, I found your name at so-and-so, or so-and-so referred, you to me. I see that you work with X author, or you worked on X book, or I read this interview and I thought you would like my middle grade mystery, or, my YA contemporary. So something kind of brief like that.
So obviously everyone listening to this should say, I heard you sounding fabulous on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. And I knew that I had to write you right away. And then second paragraph should be just straight into the pitch.
Yep. Yeah. Like a little bit of summary, give me a sense, like introduce your key players, give me a sense of what the story is going to be. But also, keep it to the point. I don't like any big reveals or twists, told to me in a query. So it's just kind of trying to give me the big picture while also showing me what makes your story unique, what makes it different from what's already out there. So those are all things that are important to have in that section.
Okay, so that's interesting. So the big twist you don't want revealed because you want to
No.
read the book and have that fun for yourself?
Yes, because I'm usually pretty good when it comes to twists, guessing what they are when it's a mystery with a big twist. So I like to see if when I'm reading the project, if I get surprised or if it was, or if I figured it out, early on in the novel. So I rather those types of things not be revealed to me in a query or even in the synopsis. It's okay if I ask for a synopsis, but I probably won't look at it until later so I don't spoil myself.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That's fun.
Yeah.
And then that last paragraph where it's relevant information about the author.
Mm-hmm.
I assume you don't want to know that my child read this book and thought it was amazing. My mom says the book is great.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff do you want to know about the author?
Yeah. So, some of the basic stuff, like, I'll see, like, I got my MFA from so-and-so university. Why you wrote it can be really interesting, too. For instance, I had this experience, and that, drove me to write this book. So give me a little bit of a sense of who you are and why this book, is important to you and why you, had to write it. It's always interesting to see those things.
And then you mentioned MFA. Does that make a difference one way or the other when you see that?
No, it doesn't really make a difference, but it's just good to know that, this is something that you are passionate about writing, and that you have some experience with that and getting critiqued and all those good things. It's just more interesting to know. It doesn't really drive my opinion either way. As far as if I'm going to take something on, it definitely doesn't.
And so then next, when you get to the actual manuscript itself,
Mm-hmm.
how much are you typically reading of a manuscript before you have some idea of whether or not you're going to continue?
It really varies. There's been some projects where I've maybe only read 5 to 10 pages, and usually if I stop that soon, it's something with the voice, where the voice isn't just grabbing me. There's a lot of errors in the writing, whether grammatically or spelling or otherwise, that's distracting me, or I'm just not getting hooked. There's something that's keeping me from being interested. It could be maybe there's authors raising too many questions and I'm confused trying to figure out what's going on. So there's all different kinds of things that could cause me to feel that way in the early pages. But usually I'm reading because based on my submission guidelines, it's the first 25 pages or first 3 chapters. So usually I'm at least reading that unless it's just something really keeping me from getting that far. But yeah, so I at least read that much, and then if I like that, that's when I'll start requesting partials or full manuscripts based on how interested I was with the writing, the voice, the premise, all those things.
So how do you determine whether you want to see a partial or a full?
So if I ask for a full, I'm really liking the writing, I'm really liking the premise, and I'm turning the pages quickly. I'm interested to see where the story is going. Usually if I'm requesting a partial, I there's a lot I like about it, but I'm not quite sure. So there might be something that isn't quite grabbing me in the way it should, but I'm curious enough about either the premise or I like the writing enough that I want to see where it goes.
And I'm curious, I don't know if there's a right answer to this, but that's how I learn, is asking dumb questions.
You
That's
can
my
never
main
ask
role.
many questions.
That's my main role as host of the show, is try and treat the guest with the utmost respect and ask dumb questions so esteemed audience doesn't have to. So dumb question number 1, I'm sure there'll be more. If you're going to request a partial, why not just request a full and then just stop reading when you're done?
Well, that is a good question. And that's not a dumb question. It's a good question. I don't know, but because then sometimes I do very well where I'll have that general feeling where I'm like, would usually request a partial, but I end up requesting a full anyway. So I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that, honestly, because, yeah, I can stop reading whenever. But yeah, I don't know how to answer that, honestly.
Speaking as a writer, I would rather send you the full so that the moment I know you're hooked, you don't have to wait for me to send you more. You can just keep reading.
That's true. That's true. That's a good way to look at it.
You're already, I assume, in bed in your jammies. You're comfortable. You're enjoying your time reading. Keep going. Okay, so how many clients do you typically take on a year?
That also really varies. I've had years where I've maybe only taken on a client or two in the entire year. I've had years where just within a few months I've taken on maybe 5 clients. So it really varies. It depends on, for instance, how full I'm feeling my list is. Do I feel like I have the time to take on more clients? Do I feel like I'm stretched a little too thin and I might not be able to at that time? So those are some of the factors that I think about when taking on new clients, because I never want to get to the point where I feel so stretched thin that I'm not giving all my clients the time and attention they very much deserve, which is very important to me. So that's kind of how I look at it. And then of course there's some years where it's just you're just seeing so much that's just perfect for you as an agent, that's really grabbing you and you can't help but offer on it. And there's some years where it's harder to find those things. So it depends.
Would 15 be unheard of for the year?
Oh yeah, I've never taken on that many clients in one year.
Would 5 be closer to it? 10?
I would say at this point, of course, in the earlier years when I first started taking on clients, I was taking on more volume. But now that I've been, doing this for 6 years now, I don't take on as many per year. So I would say between around 5, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less is probably safe to say for a year at this point.
So you've got my full manuscript. You've read it. You're totally in love. You say, "Oh my God, this is indeed the greatest book ever written." What happens next? Do you start stalking me or the writer online to see what information you could find out? Do you arrange a phone call? What's your next move?
Honestly, usually I set up a phone call first. So what I do is I do send an email where I give a little bit of information about me and the agency and how much I loved this project and would love to work with you on it. And then I say, hey, let's set up a time to call. I don't know. For whatever reason, I don't like doing the just calling before the author knows I'm going to be calling. I want to make sure, I'm not catching them at a weird time or anything. So I always like to send a little email first before doing the call. And then, yeah, usually before the call, I might, if I'm not already following them on Twitter, I might do that, kind of look through and see what they've been talking about. If they have an author website, I'll typically look at that, or a blog. So I do a little bit of social media stalking before the call, usually.
So if you're looking at a blog or a website, what's going to turn your eye and what's going to repel you? Or catch your eye. Turn your head, catch your eye.
Yeah, it's just like when I'm looking at, an author website, I like to read the little bio and just learn a little bit more about the author and if they're talking about other books they've worked on, if they're already published, what those books are. Those are always things that draw my attention, just because I want to get to know more about the person because I'm excited about their writing, so I want to get to know them a little bit better too. And I guess things that would repel me is if, for instance, I went to an author's blog or an author's Twitter account and they're bad mouthing agents or publishing professionals or, there's something like that. That would be a major red flag. But I can't really think of anything else I've really seen that's totally repelled me from talking to someone. It would have to be something pretty major like that. And surprisingly, you'll see some authors who do that. So it's like you're trying to get an agent, but you're bad-mouthing publishing on Twitter.
What did you find bad-mouthing? Like just, I'm so sick of the query process. Why aren't agents
No,
recognizing
not like that.
person?
Like actual. No, I mean, that's totally okay to be like, oh, querying is hard. I wish this was easier. Why is this like that? That's fine to talk about that stuff. But I mean, like saying so-and-so is like so slow. They're like, they rejected my manuscript. How dare they? This is a New York Times bestseller. Kind of things like that.
So anytime they're calling out somebody just specifically by name, that's a big no-no.
Yeah, yeah. If they're saying negative things, like if they're adding someone on Twitter and they're, talking to them in a nice manner, that's totally fine. But also all agents talk. So when there's things like that going on, the rest of us generally find out. So there was something recently on Twitter, without going too much into specifics, where this author was bad-mouthing a specific agent and saying they don't have any sales and they're not a good agent and stuff like that, yet they're looking for an agent. So I don't quite understand why someone would do that in any circumstance, but...
Not using your public name. Come on, authors. That's what anonymous boards are for.
Yeah, go complain on the anonymous boards. Luckily, that comes out super rarely, so it's not something I'm seeing all the time. It's definitely not a big thing.
What if I'm, or the author is not bad-mouthing an agent, saying only great things about other authors, but they have extreme political views one way or the other? Is that a turnoff?
That's a tricky one, because obviously I respect, any freedom of speech and all those good things and being able to voice your opinion, but, I'm working in children's books, so if anyone is saying, anything racist or, hurtful or, attacking others about their political views, I wouldn't want to work with someone like that. So there's a fine line between expressing how you feel about politics and then, kind of pushing those views on others and putting down others' points of views.
Gotcha. So, okay, you do the online search, and if you're looking at their social media presence, and you've got to then at some point pitch the book to an editor and try and convince them that this is an author that's going to go the extra mile. They're really going to promote this book. Is there are you looking for a certain number of followers on their Twitter handle, or?
Nope, never, honestly. And, there's some authors I take on who don't have a Twitter yet. And also, it depends a little bit on the age range you're working with, too. For instance, like with picture books, it's not nearly as big of a thing to be on social media as it is if you're more of a YA writer. But also, I would say, do what you're comfortable with social media wise. So for instance, some people might really prefer Instagram. Some people might really prefer Twitter. Some people might not be on either and might, just have a blog. So I'd say whichever, social media medium you prefer, just make sure you're posting regularly on that one versus trying to kind of half do several different ones. But as far as followers, that's really, especially for a debut, that's not really a big thing to me, because, once, that book is, going to be published, and that's really when you'll start getting followers, people who start to discover you and things like that. So it definitely would never cause me to say no if someone didn't have a social media presence, or if they did, they didn't have a lot of followers. That's not so big for me. Gotcha.
So it would just be also nice, but not the primary thing?
Yeah, and I also, with authors that I do take on and represent, I often will help them with those things too. If they're looking to get more active in, on Twitter, and how can they do that, and what kinds of things, might be helpful to post and get involved with, I can definitely guide if they want me to do that.
And if somebody had an extremely popular middle grade themed podcast that had recently boosted literary agent Christa Heschke, would that be a difference maker, you think?
I mean, that would be cool.
It's not a real question. But here's one that is. Okay, so you check out the social media, no red flags. You've got a pretty good sense that this is somebody you want to work with. Then that phone call.
Yeah.
Has it ever been the case that somebody has said something stupid during an initial phone call that killed the whole deal?
No, never. Honestly, I realized that being put on the spot a little bit and, having that call with an agent can be nerve-wracking. And so sometimes there's a little bit of nerves there. And sometimes I get like a little bit of nerves doing those calls too, because I want to make sure that I say the right thing and impress the person I'm talking to. So no, I mean, honestly, sometimes you'll stumble over words a little bit or forget your question or whatever, but that's just, part of being on a call like that. That's totally cool. I've never had a call that's just went so downhill that I was like, oh, never mind, I don't want to work with you. That's never happened.
I was afraid to say all the things I hate about literary agents on social media, but now that I'm talking to you.
Well, that probably would do it.
What's the purpose of that call? What are you hoping to get out of it and hoping to provide?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is definitely to get to know that person because as an agent, I'm definitely looking to be a career agent with each of my authors, meaning I want to work with them from book to book and beyond. So I'm not just focusing on this one book, like, hey, I'm going to work with you on this book and then see how it goes. That's definitely not me as an agent. So I think it's important that when I have that call, that both of us feel comfortable with each other, the conversation's flowing well, like that person can ask me questions. They're not afraid to ask me questions. And then I get a sense of, hey, where do you see your career going? Like, for instance, I'm offering you rep on this YA fantasy. Is that where you see yourself continuing to write? Or do you also write middle grade? Do you also write picture books? Do you also write adult? So kind of learning all those things about the author, getting a sense of what's important to them, and as in an agent too, are they looking for someone who's really editorial? Are they looking for someone who has a lot of New York Times bestselling clients? Like whatever it is, and then making sure that I can provide them with those things, or so it works both ways too, because it's like matchmaking, I guess. The agent has to have all the qualities they're looking for that are important to them, and then also I have to make sure that they seem like, they'd be good to work with. They're excited about their writing career and building that. It's kind of a time to get to know those things about someone.
If I come back and I say, I envision my career being just this book, or conversely, I want to write a book in every genre before I die. My next is going to be an erotic Western. That's my follow-up to my middle grade novel. Either of those things an issue?
Well, if it's an area like that I don't represent at all, then I would be like, well, I don't know if I'd be the right agent for you then, because I do not work on adult Western erotica. But sometimes, though, I've actually worked with clients before where they do middle grade and they do, for instance, like adult nonfiction, which I don't do at all. And they have an agent for adult nonfiction, and I handle their kids. So there have been situations where that has happened and where it's worked. But I would say that, if they're maybe trying to go too much all over the board, that might be a red flag, just because I think it's great when you write for different genres and in different age groups. A lot of my clients do that. They kind of dabble. But I think especially as a debut, it's important to kind of, build your author brand a little bit. And so maybe your first 2 books are YA contemporary, and, then you have a picture book here and there thrown in. And then maybe you go into like a different genre in YA after you kind of built that platform a little bit. Those are things I would definitely think about during the call.
So the call goes well. You're excited about my novel, The Haunted Shovel. I've told you I'm working on the follow-up, The Haunted Pickaxe. We're going to have a great time. What's the next step? How do we proceed?
Yeah. So at that point, I would say, hey, if you have the manuscript out with any other agents, feel free to take a couple weeks to, gather responses and make your decision. That's usually the next step. And then, hoping they pick me, and then we take it from there. Sign an agency agreement and start on editorial and all those good things.
So editorial, how closely are you working with a client to get that manuscript polished, and how much time are you willing to put in polishing up a manuscript?
All the time necessary. Honestly, I really love the editorial side of things. So I would call myself a very editorial agent. I work very closely with that with all my authors, whether they're writing picture books, middle grade, or YA. We're at least usually doing a couple rounds or more of revisions. Sometimes, with a YA, we might do 3, 4, even 5 back and forth. Usually the more we do, it's getting to be kind of smaller and smaller tweaks. Sometimes I'll do the occasional line edit, on a section to kind of show the author what I'm talking about. So yeah, very editorial. I'll do as much as it takes. Yeah, I love it.
And this is after an author has written a manuscript good enough to turn your head, get your attention, and get representation.
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah.
doing that, are you editing specifically just to your personal preference to make the book the best it can be? Are you editing with a specific editor in mind to submit
No,
to?
no, never towards a specific editor. It would be more general, big picture type of edits, and it's not my specific preference either. So my assistant Danielle also, like, we combine our notes, so she'll give her feedback as well. So each author I work with is getting a couple sets of eyes on everything. But yeah, big picture. So if there's any plot holes, if there are pacing issues, if the character, how they're acting is all of a sudden very different than how they were before, developing characters more, making sure their motivations are clear, if there's areas where the writing's kind of choppy. So all those things I would focus on, because I'm trying to make it as, polished and as strong and clear as it can be before submitting to editors, because, editors, they get a lot of submissions, and so it's really important that they're seeing something that's really polished and can stand out, to them. So that's why I work so closely on that side of things.
Gotcha. When I chatted with Molly O'Neill, she said something that fascinated me, that she wanted to leave a little bit of revision room left for the editor she's submitting to, so that they can have the joy of discovering some of those things to fix.
Oh, yeah. That I do that too. I think most agents probably would say they do, just because you can only edit as one person. You can only edit something so much before it's like, okay, we need to pass it on, to the next person. So whoever that editor is going to be that loves the project, where they're going to go more into kind of the nitty gritty things, where they're going to be editing at the line level. So while I might line edit a section, just to, show something to the author, I don't ever line edit the whole novel. I'm not really looking for grammar and spelling unless there's a lot of it. I point that out. But yeah, there's always something that the editor is going to find too. So I'm not ever editing something to death, basically, I guess I would say.
Has it ever happened that you got a manuscript that you got to the state you thought was perfect, and then the editor took it and said, "This is perfect. Let's go ahead and set the printing press"?
Never. Never. Not once. They always find something. I mean, there are times where I've gotten very short editorial letters, but more often than not, no matter how much you edit something, you'll get at least a 3-4 page editorial letter, if not more, from an editor.
And I saw a quote from you that I wanted to ask you about. You had said something to the effect that you wanted to make an author's book sometimes more marketable while maintaining their artistic vision, something to that effect. How do you achieve that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where I said that. So I'm never really, when I'm editing something, I'm not thinking, hey, this is what we have to do to make it more marketable. It's more, like I said, big picture stuff. I never would do anything to sacrifice an author's artistic vision. So I always like to tell the author when I'm sending editorial notes, hey, remember, this is one person's opinion. There are some things here that you might not want to edit. You might be like, I want to keep this as is, or I want to try this direction instead of that direction. Like, it's very much an open conversation. I'm never going to tell an author that they need to edit something in this particular way. I would never do that. I always say to them, this is your book. This is your baby. You have to follow the feedback that resonates with you and feels true to your vision for the story. As far as the marketing potential of a book, I'm always thinking about that when I'm considering taking on someone as a new client. Of course, I'm like, hey, I love this book, and this is in this genre that's really working well right now. That's cool. That's an added bonus. But I'm more so looking for a writer whose work I'm just passionate about. I can't imagine not working on it. I love the story. I love the writing, the voice, whatever, all those things. I think about that much more than I think about this is going to be a big bestseller or this is going to go to auction. I mean, that's great when those things happen, But to me, it's more important to have that passion for the project. And then once I'm working with an author, after the first book, we'll have the conversation, hey, what should we work on next? So the marketing side of things, the market side of things, come into play more there, where an author will be like, hey, I have this idea and this idea. What do you think might fit better in the market right now? And I'll give, my advice as far as that goes. But yeah, it's more at those phases that I'm thinking about those things versus when I'm actually editing it.
Gotcha. So some follow-up questions about every one of those steps.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with, we go to the big-time editor that comes back and says, hey, we love this story, but we want the haunted shovel to be a haunted spade. And I freak out and say, my God, no. I based this on my grandmother's shovel. It means everything to me. I can't make that change. How do you negotiate a pitfall like that?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, most editors, when they take on a project too, they say the same thing that I just said, where they're like, hey, this is still your book. I'm going to guide you in certain directions, but I never want you to say yes to something you're not comfortable with. And, that's always worked out. And if it's something a more major plot line that the author's not sure of, usually I'll set up a call so they can actually talk with the editor, and I'll be on the call too. And we'll do a little bit of brainstorming to figure out maybe a nice middle ground that makes everyone happy. So that's how I would tackle that when that does happen.
Gotcha. And I'm sure this never happens. But in the event that, for some reason, all of foolish New York publishing doesn't recognize the brilliance of my haunted shovel novel, and we do our best and we submit to everybody that it's a good fit for, and it just doesn't happen, what do we do then?
Yeah, and that happens too, even when as a debut, and even with someone who has a track record and has published books, where there'll be a book that you go out with and it just, for whatever reason, doesn't get traction. And it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be that specific editor has a book that's a little too similar. It's in a genre that just editors aren't buying as much of it right now. So yeah, those things happen, and it's always a conversation with the author where I'll be like, hey, I've sent this out very widely. We don't really have many options left. I think it might be best to, crack out that next book and make that the best it can be and go out with that project. So you'll hear from a lot of, authors that they'd written, a few books or several books even before they had that book that, actually sold and became published. So that's not unusual at all for the first one or even the first few to not sell, because there's just so many factors that go into it.
Okay, so I say, well, the only thing I've got is my sequel, The Haunted Pickaxe. Obviously, we can't go submitting the sequel, right? If we haven't sold the first book.
Yeah.
So then, are you helping me to generate story ideas and figure out my next move?
Yeah, definitely. And that's always part of the offer call too, is where we're talking about different project ideas and works in progress and all those types of things. And most authors, have several things they at least have started to think of or play around with ideas for. So yeah, I love doing the brainstorming part of things too. I do that with a bunch of my clients, where we'll be like, hey, I kind of have this kernel of an idea. Do you think there's anything there? What can we do with that? And then working on that next project together, as closely as they want me to be. So I have some authors who they're like, hey, I wrote a couple chapters. What do you think? Or and other authors that I work with, they don't want me to see anything until they have a full draft. But yeah, as much as they want me involved, I'm happy to brainstorm and kind of work through the whole book with them too.
So if you're out with an editor at an event or chatting and networking and making those connections, and you happen to overhear such and such editor is looking for a book about, I don't know, narwhals and dolphins having underwater fights, do you come back to me and say, hey, this shovel thing is not working out? Do you have anything for me about narwhals versus dolphins? Do you get that prescriptive in your suggestions?
Not
if you know there's an availability for it?
Not usually, unless when I hear that, it's something that I was just like, oh, wow, this would actually be a total fit for the types of things this author writes. the most that I've done is I got a YA from one of my authors, and it read to me like historical horror, and that's not what it was at all, because I only saw a chapter, so she didn't get into the meat of it, and it was actually a contemporary, and it was not a horror at all. So I was like, do you want to make this a horror? That could be really cool. So I've kind of guided things in that way, but it's what the author is comfortable with. I've definitely never gotten that prescriptive where I'm like, well, you write this very specific, story. No, not so much. I might say, hey, have you thought about trying a mystery? You're really good at X, Y, and Z in your writing. That could be a cool thing to try. But it's always up to what, they're passionate about and what they're comfortable with writing too.
Well, if I'm devastated that my first book didn't sell, and now we've established that great idea that I've got for the second book, but it takes me a while to write it, say, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 5 years, is there any point in there where you start to say, hey, how serious are you as an author, and we start to have a difficult conversation?
No, not really, honestly. I've definitely had authors who have, gone off into the writing or revision cave for, quite some time. And that's totally fine with me. I never like to rush anyone's creative process. I mean, maybe if I haven't heard from you in 5 years, I'd probably be like, hey, are you still writing? Are we still working together? But hey, everyone has a different speed and a different process. So
See, I've been doing a lot of research, and I have half an outline. Give me another 2 years, and I'll get the rest of it for you.
Sure, whatever. Honestly, take your time, send it when it's ready. I'm never going to push anyone to write faster than, they're able or can.
And then a question that I'm always asking, because I know that the esteemed audience wants to know as well, is how much difference can an agent make for you in contract negotiation, especially for a debut author, when I keep reading that more and more publishing houses are offering template contracts. Everybody that comes in today gets this deal. Are you bumping into that, or can you find the wiggle room, and how do you without giving away your secret sauce?
I am definitely never getting a template contract, and if I am, I'm negotiating the heck out of it. So one of the nice things about working at McIntosh and Otis is we've been around a very long time, since 1928, and we also have a very well established children's department. So even before my time, we had started establishing what's called a boilerplate contract with different publishers that we work with. And that just means basically, specific terms that will kind of carry across different agreements. We'll always see that when we do a new agreement. So that's common. I mean, contracts also change. So, the language will change and I'll have to go back and tweak things. So there's always at least that, but every contract, even when we have a boilerplate agreement with a publisher, I'm still going through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they're also very different. The initial offer, the advance will vary a lot between different books and in different age ranges and, different experience levels for the author. The sub-rights, meaning things like translation rights, audio, book club, all those things are things we negotiate in every single agreement as far as what the publisher can keep and what the author can keep. So, yes, I'm definitely not getting template agreements. And every agreement is looked at very closely and, negotiated to the best of my ability, because I think it's important, especially with all those sub-rights, is, to keep as many as possible for the author and then try to sell those, because that's, more income for the author. They'll get a higher cut than they would if it was with a publisher. And also sometimes publishers sit on those sub-rights and they don't really do much with them. And whereas I will actively try to sell them. So yeah, I definitely think working with an agent, you're going to get a lot better contract than if you're doing it yourself.
And then are you going to be fighting for me, I assume, going forward after that initial advance to make sure that my royalties are correct and paid promptly and all that good stuff?
Oh, you bet. Yes, that's very important, because we do catch mistakes from time to time. Where, for instance, if you get a royalty escalator after a certain amount of copies sell, that they actually escalate the royalties and they don't keep paying you that initial royalty. So we have an accountant who is very closely looking at every statement that comes in, and I look at them before they go to the author as well. So make sure to catch any mistakes and make sure everything looks right.
And how can you audit the publisher and make sure that the numbers they're giving you are a fair assessment of what the actual book's performance has been?
Yeah, so if you feel like the amount of sales do not reflect how well you think the book is doing, that's always language that's in any publishing contract as far as how that would work, and that's something that we negotiate to make sure it's fair. So it's usually you get a certain amount of time to be able to say, hey, I'm going to audit you, publisher, because this is fishy, and get an accountant to do that and run the numbers and look at their books and make sure everything is correct. So that we haven't had to do that, luckily. But
if you did have to do it, is there a concern that, I guess I'm done submitting to you forever after that?
Oh, I mean, if there's some kind of little errors will happen from time to time, and that's just part of it, and you're just catching that and making sure it's addressed right away and, fixed, and you don't have that problem again. But even then, there's only an error every once in a while. It's not something you're commonly seeing. It's very infrequent. But yes, if you're seeing someone who's not paying you on time, they are frequently making errors in their accounting statements, that would for sure raise all the red flags. And I'd be like, I can't send to this publisher anymore. The author needs to get paid and in a timely manner.
In that same vein, not that this would ever happen with you or with any agent in your agency, but some scumbag agent in another agency, we read these stories that they're sitting on the royalties, they spent the author's money. How can an author protect themselves? How can they make sure that because I assume that as the agent, you're getting the royalties to you and then passing them on directly to the author after you take whatever your negotiated rate is, right?
Yeah, so the best way to protect yourself would be a lot of agencies do have an agency agreement that also protects the author and says, hey, we're going to pay you promptly. We're going to give you, the accounting that we get exactly from the publisher. So all the royalty statements, you're going to get those. So you see, hey, this is how many copies, this is the amount of money they sent us, and then this is the commission taken out. So, they're always getting the whole picture. But if you're not getting statements, for instance, you're not seeing those publishing statements from your agent, you're just getting a random check here and there, that's definitely questionable. Or if, in any contract, you can look at your contract too as an author, and you can see specifically when each publisher is sending royalty statements, and if you didn't get one, asking your agent, hey, I didn't get this statement. Was it sent late? Sometimes that happens where publishers get behind and they might come in a couple weeks later than expected. But yeah, to keep on top of those things too. But hopefully you don't ever have to worry about that. And you have an agent too, you're regularly getting your statements, twice a year. Everything is laid out. Yeah, that's definitely important.
And obviously, again, this would never be an issue with McIntosh and Otis. You've been there 10 years. So obviously, you certify McIntosh and Otis is the agency to belong to and be with. In fact, if you would, just tell us a little bit about what makes McIntosh and Otis the best agency in New York and the spot that people should be sending their queries to.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about working at McIntosh and Otis is just our history. Just the fact that we've been around since 1928, and we work with all these amazing estates. We work with the John Steinbeck's estate and Upton Sinclair and Sinclair Lewis. And we worked on, Scott Odell and the Island of the Blue Dolphins and Lynn Reed Banks and Virginia Hamilton, like all these classic authors, on both sides, on the adult side, the kids side. So having that is already a pretty cool thing. But that on top of that, we also are always looking for new clients and, working closely with our front list clients and our debut clients and building up that new talent. And I would say we're what I would call more of a boutique agency. So I'm the children's department, me and my assistant Danielle, and we do everything for you. So that's not just, selling your book to a U.S. publisher and doing the editorial and helping you through that process. It's also I also do translation rights. I go to Bologna every couple of years. I did a book fair in Dubai. And we work with sub-agents in all different kinds of countries where we're always actively pushing our stuff. We're like, hey, this book is coming out. It got these 2-star reviews, so that and audio rights. I personally would be submitting those too when I keep those rights for the author. So we're doing everything for you. So you're not working with like 10 different people. It's just me, me and Danielle. We're doing all of that for you. And we also do film, TV, stage as well. And we have a film agent in LA who we work with on those things. So you kind of get everything and all the rights that you can imagine that go along with, publishing a book and beyond.
How much hand-holding can I expect from you if I'm an extremely needy author and I need to talk to you at least twice a week at midnight? That's when I'm crying the hardest. That's when I have to pick up the phone and talk to you for a minimum of 2 hours. How much personal attention can a client expect to receive from you?
I give a lot of personal attention, but I probably would draw the line at calls at midnight for 2 hours. So, 95% of the communication, especially if it's a phone call, will be during business hours. That's not to say I never take calls after hours. I certainly do. If something's more urgent that needs to be talked about right away. So I guess I'm kind of always on call in that respect. But yes, communication is probably one of the most important things to me as an agent. So every day I'm going through my regular inbox and I look at every single email I get, and someday I'm getting 50 plus emails just in my regular inbox. But with clients, I like to be like, hey, even if I can't give you an answer right now on something, I'll be like, hey, I saw this, I'm looking into this, I'm going to do XYZ. So all my authors know that I'm there, that if they have a question or concern, or if they're, worried about something, that they can always talk to me and reach me.
So back to being a useful idiot, my primary role, and asking a couple of dumb questions. I'm not assuming this is not true of any of your clients because they're all wonderful or they wouldn't be working with you. But just some agent etiquette. How often is too often to be contacting and bothering your agent?
It really does depend on what it is. For instance, there'll be periods of time where I'll have some clients where we're emailing back and forth multiple times a day, especially if there's something going on, there's something we're trying to fix or, work out. Maybe that person's editor left, or, something happened with the editorial letter that they're not feeling good about. We might be going back and forth a lot in a specific day. But I would say that it becomes too much. For instance, if it's just checking in on like, hey, we submitted this yesterday, did anyone get back yet? And doing that kind of thing every day. Or, anything like that. So for instance, when I go out on submission, I always give my clients a submission list. I'm like, hey, this is who I'm sending to. If you have any feedback, let me know. You want to add people, take people off. And then whenever I get any kind of response, I send that along to them. So they always know, hey, as soon as I hear, you'll be the first to know. So if I get someone who's like always like, hey, what's happening? Why haven't I heard anything? Why isn't anyone getting back to me? And they're doing that consistently, that can be too much. But I mean, that's really the only thing. Because there's always a lot going on. So I feel like I'm in pretty constant communication with all of my clients, whether they're on submission or revising or what have you. It was probably a very long
2 hours since it went out. I mean, even if they had to stop for lunch, by now they should have read my submission, right?
The thing is, too, though, like being on submission can be really nerve-wracking, and I totally get that. So, sometimes I have to have those conversations where it's like, hey, you know what, it's okay. I understand you put your book out into the world. It's scary, but know that I have your back, and I will nudge editors, if they're not getting back to me in a timely manner. I'll let you know what's going on. And if you're feeling like really freaked out about anything, we can always talk about it. So, 'cause I get that. I know what it feels like being on submission and getting passes and wondering, if your book is going to sell, what's going to happen. So I realize all those things about being an author too, and I try to be there as much as I can.
Are you aiming primarily for more of a professional relationship, or should I be calling and saying, hey, my dad said something really discouraging about my writing this week, and I'm very upset and need to talk with somebody?
I think it's a balance of both, honestly, with my clients, where it's, you know, we've gotten to know each other and we have somewhat of a personal relationship too, on top of the professional one. And that varies by the person and how open they are. And, you know, if we've met several times in person and we've had long conversations, we might be a little bit closer than clients I haven't met in person. But yeah, it's kind of usually a balance of the two. And that's something that I gauge, like I was mentioning during that offer call. Can we easily talk to each other? That's definitely an important part of it too.
And just in general, not you specifically, but if you're an author and you're starting to get the sense that your agent's not as excited about your work as they once were, the Haunted Shovel didn't sell, the follow-up about narwhals didn't sell, and it's been 5 years and I'm still working on my next book, at what point should I start to think that this is a relationship that we maybe need to reevaluate? What are some signs authors can look for?
I feel like now I'm going to be looking in my inbox for a query about the Haunted Shovel.
It's coming after this.
I
for
can't
sure.
wait.
Somebody's writing it.
It.
Esteemed audience, that one's free. You just run with it.
I would always hope that it would be a conversation where if an agent was ever feeling like, hey, I don't think this is working out for whatever reason, that they would say, hey, X author, why don't we get on the phone and kind of discuss things and where things are going and all that. Because sometimes it might be, you've tried several books and maybe the author isn't growing editorial as much as you think they need to sell in the current market, or there's just something that isn't quite working. They might be better with a different agent who does more of this than you do, and maybe it's not an area you focus on as much, or they're kind of changing where they want to go with their career and you're not sure you can help them with that. But anything, no matter what it is, it should always be an open conversation between the author and the agent. Never as an agent or an author, just say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm leaving tomorrow. Like, I'm canceling our agency agreement. I would always hope it'd be an open conversation. And it definitely is for me. If I, I had any concerns or anything, I would always talk to the author about it.
Gotcha. So if I'm frustrated that my agent hasn't sold my book for a couple of years, and I just heard this amazing podcast interview with Christa Heschke, and oh my God, I gotta try to see if she's available. What's the best way to break up with the previous agent?
Yeah. I would say, like I said, kind of having that conversation and be, at least letting them know, this is why I don't think this is working out. I'm looking for someone who's more editorial than you are, or I'm looking to write more picture books and you don't represent picture books, or whatever it is. I think the best thing is to at least, tell that agent, this is why it's not working out for me. I think it's better for me to, part ways and, go out and query again and find someone who's going to be that perfect fit. And it's not abnormal at all for, authors not to stay with that first agent or, end up moving elsewhere. That happens all the time. And that doesn't mean that agent isn't a good agent. There's just something that maybe isn't quite clicking. So yeah, again, just being open and honest with the agent you're working with before, going out and looking for other agents, and just saying, hey, guess what? I found another agent. Bye. Yeah, don't do that.
Just text you.
This is over.
Dear agent, welcome to Dumpville, population U.
Or just ghost the agent, just stop responding. What is this, a bad relationship gone wrong?
I suppose if you're an agent, you take on a client that you find out has done that to their previous agent, that would probably have to change your opinion of them.
100%. Yeah. If you find out through the publishing grapevine, which we all, and, we talk to each other a lot and, we hear about these things that happen. Yeah, if I heard that, I'm like, yeah, this person, like, broke their agency agreement or, they did something and they weren't supposed to do, I probably would think twice about working with them.
Gotcha. And my cat just bit me. Mabel, go away.
My cat's just staring at me, judging me from a distance.
We are book people and cat people. We are well matched.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit about marketing, and then I've got a couple of questions I'm obligated to ask you, and we can start thinking about wrapping this thing up and spending more time with our cats, I suppose. Because I never want to get this to the point where it just becomes a slow slog. I want to stop while we're still having fun. But I do want to ask about marketing and how much should an author be expected to contribute to their marketing, and what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say as an author, if your title is the lead title for that season, for that publisher, they're going to do a lot more marketing than if you're anywhere on the mid list. But most books are, on that mid list, and publishers thus don't do as much there. Usually they'll do kind of the bare minimum, where it'll be sending out your books to, trade reviews like Kirkus and School Library Journal and all those, maybe sending it out to some bloggers, sending out some ARCs, things like that. But not a whole lot more than that. I find that a lot of times as an author, especially if you're a debut author and you're trying to break out and find a following and, get some decent sales, you have to be prepared to do a fair amount of marketing yourself. I wish there was a little bit more balance there, but unfortunately that's kind of the nature of publishing these days, where a lot of it is put on the author. And that could be things like, building up your social media following, doing book giveaways, doing blog tours, doing school visits, doing a signing in your local town at your local indie bookstore, what have you. Like all those little things help, I think, to some extent. Being present so new readers can find you, whether it's with an author website or, like I said, social media. And you don't have to go crazy. Like, you'll see a lot of articles online about, how much should you do and should you be spending like half your advance on your marketing? Probably not. There's a lot of things you can do without spending a lot of money, and, get new readers. So, and it's also doing what you're comfortable with too. Like, some authors are more comfortable with, doing school visits and things like that than others. So it's finding what's right for you too. And also one of the first things I do, when I sell a book is like, hey, closer to pub, like, can we get a call with someone in marketing that's working on the book and see what they're doing, get a marketing plan, and then when it's closer to pub, running through those ideas, what ideas the author might have, and how we can work together as a team and get the most exposure, for the book and get it out to as many readers as possible.
Obviously, one of the most important things you can do is appear on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. So head to middlegradeninja.com, email me. I love guests that I don't have to look for. If you find me, that's so much easier for me. And thus far, I'm not charging. Who knows? Maybe one day. Probably I won't, but it's a nice dream.
I remember I found you back in 2013 as a new agent.
Yeah, I wasn't charging then, hasn't changed since, so I don't think it's ever going to happen. Must be something more to this than money.
The joy of helping others.
So if book does so-so, doesn't do absolutely terrible, earns back the advance, but it doesn't set the world on fire, when you go to pitch the next book, how much can you cite the author's previous marketing efforts as a selling point?
That honestly doesn't usually come in until a publisher is interested in taking it to acquisitions, where they're bringing in sales and marketing, who's going to want to know those things. So Yeah, sometimes I've had publishers be like, okay, well, what's their social media following? Are they going to do something to increase that? What kinds of things did they do for their last book? So that is important to some publishers. Some publishers want more details on that than others. Definitely earning out is a great start. But publishers, I think most publishers, especially if you're going from one to the other, because obviously if you're selling a book to the original publisher, they're going to know all those things. But if you're, selling something to a new house, um, you know, unless your sales, like you sold like 5 copies, usually they're willing to, you know, work with you if they're passionate about the book. So I would say just because the first book maybe didn't do as well as they'd hoped, that doesn't mean that you can never sell another book again. Definitely not.
Gotcha.
But
And
sometimes a book might not sell well. Sorry, a book
oh,
might
there you
not
go.
sell well, but you'll get really good reviews, or you'll, get some kind of awards buzz, even if the book doesn't win an award. So things like that are important as well, and they mean something to publishers.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. If a book does absolutely dismal, everyone hates it in the reviews, and it doesn't sell, is it pen name a clock, or is there a strategy to come back from that?
Um, I mean, really, a lot of times the next project just speaks for itself, though, because before the editor is asking for all that info on what the sales actually were and reviews and things like that, they're reading that next book, and if they love it enough and they're willing to, put their team behind it, then, you can still have a super successful next book, even if the first book didn't do so well. Most authors, don't have this huge breakout success to start with, that they're, slowly building, from book to book. And sometimes there's big changes too, like your first book, maybe 5 people read it, but then your next book becomes a New York Times bestseller. So you never really know.
Gotcha. And then, I had a burning question and it's gone right out of my head. So hopefully it will come back to me. I hate when that happens.
Oh, me too. I hate that.
Well, I didn't ask you about money because there was that Twitter article, that the article that blew up on Twitter not that long ago about the author that got a 6-figure advance, burned through it all, and then
Oh,
was
yeah, I saw
shocked when her
that.
next advance wasn't that big.
Mm-hmm.
I don't author shame, but there were some points in that article where I was doing some heavy eye rolling.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you offer me representation, should I quit my day job? When do we have the conversation about money and how I should plan my finances, or do we?
Yeah, no, we definitely can if you're comfortable with it. Some authors don't really want to talk in detail finance stuff with me, and others, have those questions and want to know more about how it works. So either way, I'm definitely open to discussing that. Um, but we make it really clear, especially if it's a bigger advance, when we actually send it, be like, hey, make sure to set money aside for taxes. Because some authors don't think about that. Oh, hey, yeah, this isn't taxed. I'm gonna be have to pay back the government a pretty big sum if I don't set some of this aside. That's gonna be a shock down the road. So yeah, we try to be very clear about that. But I would say don't quit your day job, because you never know. You could have one book that does really well. You could have 2 books that you don't get as big of advances, or you might have a lull where there's a few years where you don't have a new book coming out, or you're not really seeing royalties. So, I mean, but that depends on your situation, because, some authors are able to do that early on where, they maybe are only working part-time, and then they, are staying at home full-time writing. So that really depends on your overall financial situation and your comfort level with that. But I wouldn't say just because you have that first book deal, the first thing to do would be to quit your job, even if it's a pretty hefty advance.
How often is it that you're encountering authors that, say, after 5 books, are in a position where they can tell their boss to shove it and be set for life?
I feel like, I mean, most of the authors I work with, even if they've done multiple books, they're still working. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I guess if you have like a nice nest egg in your savings account, you're feeling like, even if I don't sell a book for a while, or my next book doesn't do as well, I could support myself, or I'll go back to work, if need be, if I don't, and this isn't as lucrative as I hoped. I would say just always have a backup plan.
Will you balance my 401k for me?
No. You probably want someone else balancing that for you that's better at numbers. That's why we have a great accountant. I feel like a lot of us book people are better at the creative side than the numbers.
Oh, that's what used to amuse me to no end. Is I was also an English major, and then my first job right out of school was I became a stockbroker, and then I was literally balancing people's 401ks, and I just chuckle. They'd be like, "How much time did you spend studying finance?" "Oh, lots of time, sir. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, man, I can do all the basic stuff for you, but if it gets too difficult, maybe you get a professional.
Let me ask you the questions I'm obligated to ask, so we can start to count down to the end. Because I know it's getting late, and I never want to wear you out completely. And I know you've probably got 20 things more to do yet this evening. Question I am obligated to ask is, Christa Heschke, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I was really convinced that I did on the 4th of July. So I'm in Brooklyn of this year. But then I realized what it was. So I'll tell you the story real quick. So I was on my roof looking at Manhattan, watching the fireworks. And so I took some videos of the fireworks. And I looked at one of them later. And there was something like flying around in the image. It was like zipping. And I was like, what is that? And then I realized that it was a mosquito who was in front of the lens, and so it looked really creepy, and it was not a flying saucer. But anyway, so that was the closest experience I've had. I've had friends who've told me that they think that they've seen flying saucers, and I believe them if they believe it. I think, like, as vast as the universe is, there has to be life elsewhere. So yeah, I believe.
My favorite thing of the last 2 years is the Pentagon came out and confirmed that they have a secret program working on studying flying saucers, and that they have recovered materials. And then the president tweeted a couple of times, and the story was just gone. It's like, wait, that was a New York Times piece. That's confirmed from the Pentagon? Oh, my God.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and there's some pretty cool shows that if you watch, like, Ancient Aliens or stuff like that, just looking back at history and thinking how certain things were made, and I don't know, it just raises questions. So if nothing else, it's really interesting to think about the possibilities. But
one of my favorite things, people think I started with this podcast asking everyone that. Nope, I've been asking everyone that for years.
Yeah.
Pivoting back to your area of expertise, 2 more questions I absolutely have to ask you, and then we'll think about calling it a night. I have to ask you about diversity in publishing. That is a hobby horse of mine, and hopefully a hobby horse of most people in publishing at this point.
Yeah.
Is we want to increase representation in novels. What is McIntosh and Otis doing to make that happen, and what are you doing, and what are you seeing publishers doing?
Well, it's personally very important for me that anything with diverse representation in the story is own voices. So that is definitely something that I always pay attention to when I'm queried. If not that some white person is writing about, an African American or someone outside of their background, it's actually someone in that background writing that story. I think that's super important. And I, participate in DV Pit, and the We Need Diverse Books movement is so important. The AAR, the Association of Authors Representatives, they do an internship slot every year for diverse applicants. So we've hired some applicants through that program, because it's also important not just on the author side of things, but also making sure that there are more editors and people in publishing who are, people of color from marginalized backgrounds as well, because publishing is still very white as far as people who work in it. So I think that's also a very important step that we need to do a lot more work on. The We Need Diverse Book movement has done so much, as DV Pit. But I think we as publishing professionals still need to do a lot more and prioritize, getting those books out, because I think it's so important that every child, every reader can see themselves as a main character in a story. And that's not just a contemporary, it's like seeing them in different genres, like seeing, themselves as a main character in a fantasy or a horror or any genre, not just more issue driven stuff. So across the board, that's so important. So I'm glad that we are taking steps in that direction, but we need to do more for sure. We need to keep growing that.
I 100% agree. Lamar Giles, when he was on, check it out in the archives if you haven't already, esteemed audience. It's a great episode. His point was, we will know that we're doing all right when we can see more mediocre books by authors of color. Because if they're publishing the mediocre stuff, then we're not just looking at the best available. We're getting the same amount of representation. So that's my half jokey response to what our ultimate goal should be: is more mediocre books across the board by everyone.
Yes.
And then I want to ask you a little bit about the future of publishing. I recently started substitute teaching a couple of days a week because my son has gone back to school almost full-time part of the week. And I've thought, well, I'm writing middle grade books, and it's been forever since I was in school. I should go talk to some kids. So that was kind of my brilliant plan, is to go there and do some market research. But we did a book project. When I was in the 5th grade, we wrote and published our own books, and we did it on a typewriter with construction paper that we drew all our own illustrations for, and it was a couple of months long process. Whereas I was in this class a month ago, and they did the books that day. They did them on iPads. They had them beautifully represented with nice looking pictures, and the story was done by the end of the day. Still needed to be edited, still needed, a little bit of help. These are 5th graders. But I was quite impressed. And I'm thinking, well, okay, when this person gets to a certain age, or with the availability of this technology for everybody in the indie publishing revolution that we're seeing, where it has never been easier in the entire history of mankind to get a book out to the entire world instantly, both for good and for ill. How do you see that? We know that that's changed publishing a little bit, which is why we've now got 5 big publishers as opposed to 10. How do you see that continuing to disrupt publishing, and how do you see publishing changing to allow and make room for that and work with that, or do you?
I don't feel like it's greatly disrupted publishing. Self-publishing can be a great option for some people, and there definitely have been some really crazy success stories that have come out of self-published books, and even some where then a traditional publisher later bought it and then they got more crazy sales. So that definitely happens. And sure, my dad, for instance, always has something self-published on his Kindle that he just randomly finds on Amazon. So it's easy to find those things as a reader, and it's easy to get your work on there as an author. But I would say, as far as making the case for traditional publishing still, it depends on your book and, what you want to do with it. Both can be great depending on what your goals are. But one of the things about self-publishing is unless you are looking to put a lot of money into hiring a publicist, a copy editor, all these things, you could be putting a lot of money into a book that maybe never, for whatever reason, gets much traction or doesn't end up selling a lot of copies. Whereas if you, go the traditional publishing route, you have a team behind you supporting you. So, yeah, I don't feel, while it's definitely growing, I don't feel like it's totally, thrown a wrench into traditional publishing. Like I said, it works for some, and some prefer, self-publishing. But as far as where it's going to go, I don't really know if it's going to do anything drastic, to be honest, where all of a sudden people are just like, I'm totally done with traditional publishing. Everyone's self-publishing now. You never know. It could happen. But I think just the benefits that there are of traditional publishing still attracts a lot of people. So I don't know if that's ever going to totally go out the window, to be honest.
Do you ever look at indie lists to see who's performing well to try and reach out to an indie author that you might want to represent and take their career to the next level?
Sure. I mean, I haven't done it personally, but my boss works with Tilly Cole, who is a pretty big USA Today best-selling indie author who, self-publishes her books and just has a huge following. All of her books do really well. And we took her on and we handle her translation rights. And we've also helped her traditionally publish some of her books, but she still also self-publishes some too. So we've had experiences with that a little bit. I haven't so much personally yet. But I do look, like I'll go on Wattpad and, kind of glance around and, see what's trending there. But I haven't offered representation to anyone that way yet. But it's definitely on the radar for sure.
Christa, this has been just a wonderful conversation. I have really enjoyed our talk tonight, and I so appreciate you making the time for it. So that I don't leave you completely out of time and exhausted, I'm going to end this with one last question because I want to be respectful of your time. It's an absolute privilege to get to talk to an expert like you that's able to give us this information. There's just no better way to get. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah,
Absolutely, any time if you get bored in a couple of months, you say, you know what would be fun going back on Middle Grade Ninja. You come right back. I'll ask you questions about simulation theory. We'll go nuts.
That sounds great.
But for tonight, my last question is always a variation of I want to catch anything that I just was too dumb to ask that you could have revealed to us if only I'd thought of the right question. So is there anything we haven't talked about or anything that you would like every author or potential author out there listening to know that would maybe make their journey easier?
This might sound obvious, but I actually was thinking about it recently because I've been I occasionally will do critiques for different SCBWI conferences, but one of the easiest things and also most helpful things you can do as an author is to make sure that you are constantly reading in the genre and age group that you write for, and making sure to read, books from the last couple of years. So it's important to know, what the market is doing, and then, what books are already out there that are published that might be similar to yours. How is yours different? It's so important because as an agent, I'm going to be noticing if like, hey, this feels dated, or this, this concept has been done to death. And if you do your research, you'll know those things, which is helpful when you are starting to query, meet editors, meet agents, and start trying to get your book published. So I know that might seem like a no-brainer, but just I thought it was important to say and make clear.
No, appreciate it.
It's fun. It's fun.
Nothing frustrates me more than authors who don't read. Why?
Yeah, they're like, I wrote this 20 years ago, or this was based on, and it's like the last book I read was 10 years ago. It's like, well, the market changes so much. It's really important to, constantly be reading and, have an understanding for what's working and what's not.
Do you screen for that when you're doing that initial phone call with a would-be client? How much they're reading and what they're reading?
Not so much. I mean, sometimes I'll talk about it a little bit. But usually if someone is not doing their research or not really up on the market, I'll see that in the query level or when I start reading, the initial pages. Often that is apparent to me. There'll be something about the voice that doesn't feel right. Like maybe it feels more adult than YA, or it's very quiet, or it feels more historical. I usually pick up on it on that phase. So if I'm having an offer call, then all those things are working well. And you'll see it too with comp titles, because in your query you're also saying, hey, this is X what meets this, or this is for readers who like this. And so I get a sense that they're reading in the current market too based on the titles they're mentioning.
It's the Wizard of Oz meets Little House on the Prairie.
I mean, hey, maybe maybe that would work sometimes if you have a modern twist on it.
Well, Christa, remind esteemed audience where they can find you online again.
Yes. So my agency website is www.macintoshandotis.com. So you'll find my little agent bio there, as well as some of my wish list items. And then I have my blog, Never Ending Stories, which is christaheschke.blogspot.com. You can find me on Twitter at Christa Heschke. I'm on Instagram, but not nearly as active there. But actually the best new place to find out my wish list, and also to see what, the kinds of books that I've sold and I've worked on and clients I've worked with. I just published my Publishers Marketplace agent page. So that's probably the most up-to-date and detailed information you can find anywhere about me online other than my blog. And I have it open to the public, so anyone can see it. You don't need a Publishers Marketplace account. I don't know the URL off the top of my head, but if you just search Publishers Marketplace and Christa Heschke, it should come up.
And as always, esteemed audience, make sure you check me out at middlegradeninja.com. Don't forget to download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and/or your free copy of the Book of David, Chapter 1. Get both. They're free. Go nuts. It'll be fun. Make sure you find yourself back here next Saturday when our guest will be, your guess is as good as mine, but somebody almost as amazing as Christa Heschke. Christa, I have been asking our guest to sign us off with the extremely ninja-like sign-off phrase, hiya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Hiya and what have you.
Perfect.